Number 10. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Some secret societies are feared because they wield direct political violence. Others are feared because they seem to gather something more unsettling behind closed doors: symbols, rituals, hidden hierarchies, and the suggestion that knowledge itself can become a private form of power. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn belongs to that second category. Founded in the late 19th century, it emerged in an age that liked to call itself modern and rational, yet still produced intense fascination with occultism, ceremonial magic, esoteric correspondences, and the possibility that ancient truths had been preserved in coded initiatory systems. That alone made the Golden Dawn unnerving to outsiders. It did not present itself as a public school of philosophy. It presented itself as a gate. That is what gave it such a charged reputation. The Golden Dawn was not merely a reading circle for curious minds. It offered degrees, rites, symbolism, and the feeling of entering a structured, hidden world layered beneath ordinary society. Names were veiled, teachings were restricted, and ceremonial life mattered. For outsiders, this is exactly the kind of thing that transforms curiosity into suspicion. Once a group suggests that truth must be guarded, that only initiates may proceed inward, and that words alone are insufficient without ritual transformation, it stops looking harmless. It starts looking like a place where identity itself is remade out of sight. What made the order especially haunting was the kind of people it drew and the kind of atmosphere it cultivated. This was not secrecy for simple criminal concealment. It was secrecy joined to ambition of the highest symbolic kind. Members were not merely learning hidden facts. They were participating in a world of invocations, diagrams, spiritual ascent, magical practice, and claims about invisible reality. To believers or sympathizers, that could feel noble or transcendent. To critics, it looked dangerously unstable, even decadent, as though educated society had built a private theater for forbidden power and called it enlightenment. That tension is precisely what makes groups like this endure in historical imagination. The Golden Dawn also reveals how fear attaches itself to orders that seem to operate at the boundary between intellect and ritual. A violent brotherhood is frightening in a familiar way. But a secret order filled with educated people performing elaborate ceremonies, invoking hidden names, and treating symbolism as action produces a different kind of dread. It suggests that the outer world is not the whole world, and that beneath respectable culture there may exist smaller circles convinced they know how to access something deeper, older, and more dangerous. Even when exaggerated, that impression lingers because secrecy plus metaphysical confidence is one of the oldest formulas for suspicion. And that is why the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn takes the number 10 spot. It was feared not because everyone believed it controlled governments or armies, but because it embodied a subtler and more enduring anxiety. That private orders may gather hidden knowledge, hidden rights, and hidden loyalties strong enough to alter the people inside them. The Golden Dawn survives in dark historical memory because it made secrecy feel spiritual, intellectual, and theatrical all at once, which is exactly the kind of combination outsiders find hardest to trust. Number 9. The Skull and Bones Society. Some secret societies are feared because they arise from distant ages of war, religion, or conspiracy. Others are feared because they exist in the heart of modern elite institutions and therefore suggest that secrecy did not disappear with modernity. It merely put on better clothes. The Skull and Bones Society belongs to that second category. Founded at Yale in the 19th century, it has become one of the most famous collegiate secret societies in the world, not because outsiders can prove every whispered claim about it, but because its combination of ritual secrecy, selective membership, and elite social continuity makes it almost perfectly designed to generate suspicion. It looks like a private chamber built inside the formation of future power. That is what gives Skull and Bones such enduring force in public imagination. Many secretive organizations remain obscure because they never appear near visible influence. This one did the opposite. Its reputation grew precisely because prominent figures in American political, financial, and cultural life were associated with it. Once a secret society appears to overlap with recognizable power, the imagination does the rest. It no longer looks like harmless pageantry. It looks like recruitment, social binding, and the quiet creation of networks that matter later when offices are filled and decisions are made. Even if the reality is less dramatic than the rumors, the structure itself invites fear. What makes the society especially unsettling is the atmosphere surrounding it. The name alone is almost too perfect. Death symbol, enclosed membership, initiation rites, strange traditions, and a physical headquarters that already looks like secrecy made architectural. Outsiders do not need access to every ritual detail for the effect to work. In fact, not knowing is part of the power. Once a group appears comfortable using symbolic death, exclusivity, and inherited private culture, it starts to seem less like a club and more like a machine for manufacturing belonging under conditions ordinary public life cannot inspect. That is the kind of thing people fear instinctively, especially in societies that speak constantly about openness and merit, while suspecting that private gates still decide too much. The deeper anxiety here is not occult terror, but elite continuity. Skull and Bones suggests that what matters most may not always happen in classrooms, elections, or visible credentials. It may happen in smaller rooms where trust is formed through secrecy, mutual recognition, and ritualized separation from the rest of society. That possibility is exactly why the society became so much larger in rumor than its confirmed details alone would justify. The less the public knows, the easier it becomes to see the organization as a hidden skeleton key to influence. Whether that view is excessive or not, it reveals something true about modern fear. People are often less disturbed by secret knowledge than by secret access. And that is why the Skull and Bones Society takes the number 9 spot. It was feared too much in part because it seemed to confirm one of the most enduring suspicions of modern life, that elite power is rarely as open as it claims to be. The society remains haunting not because every conspiracy attached to it is credible, but because it sits exactly where secrecy becomes socially explosive, among the educated, the connected, and the potentially powerful. When a closed brotherhood forms beside public institutions and then feeds into public life, fear hardly needs embellishment. The structure itself is enough. Number 8. The Eleusinian Mysteries. Some secret brotherhoods were feared because they seemed to plot against the living world. Others were feared because they guarded access to something even more disturbing, the possibility that they knew what waited after death. The Eleusinian Mysteries belong to that second category. Centered on the cult of Demeter and Persephone in ancient Greece, they were among the most famous initiatory rites of the ancient world, attracting participants across centuries and commanding extraordinary reverence. That alone made them powerful. But what made them unsettling was the secrecy. Initiates went in, experienced something transformative, and came out bound by silence. In a world that loved public religion, here was a sacred system whose deepest truths were deliberately withheld. That is what gave the mysteries such an unusual hold over the imagination. Outsiders could know the broad framework, seasonal ritual, mythic descent, return, grain, death, renewal, but not the inner experience itself. And that distinction mattered. Public religion explains itself through visible sacrifice, festival, and civic order. Mystery religion asks for trust before revelation. Once people hear that those initiated emerge changed, more hopeful about death, more bound to the right, and yet refuse to say exactly what occurred, fear begins to grow in the empty space. The unknown acquires sacred density. The secret is no longer mere privacy. It becomes authority. What made the Eleusinian Mysteries especially haunting was the scale of their legitimacy. This was not some obscure hidden cult on the margins of society. Respected citizens, elites, and major figures could participate. That respectability actually deepened the unease. A dangerous underground sect is easy to condemn from a distance. A secret initiatory system woven into the cultural fabric is harder to dismiss. It suggests that secrecy itself may be essential to power, and that civilization may preserve its most intimate beliefs in forms it refuses to explain publicly. That idea is deeply destabilizing, because it means hidden knowledge is not outside society. It may be at the center. The fear around the mysteries also came from the subject matter they touched. Death has always produced some of the strongest forms of secrecy in human culture. A group that claims no ordinary political program, but offers transformed understanding of mortality immediately enters a different category of power. It becomes difficult to tell whether such a brotherhood is harmlessly pious, spiritually profound, or dangerously suggestive. In antiquity, the penalties for profaning or exposing the mysteries show how seriously the boundary was guarded. That seriousness itself would have confirmed to observers that whatever happened inside was not decorative. It mattered enough to protect fiercely. And that is why the Eleusinian Mysteries take the number 8 spot. They were feared too much, not because they were obviously sinister in the modern sense, but because they embodied one of the oldest reasons people distrust closed ritual worlds. The suspicion that anyone who guards the secret of death guards a power ordinary society cannot easily challenge. The mysteries remain haunting because they show that secrecy does not need conspiracy to become formidable. Sometimes it only needs sanctity, silence, and the promise that initiates know something the rest of the world does not. Number 7. The Thuggee Brotherhood. Some feared brotherhoods became monstrous in rumor. Others became monstrous because rumor and violence reinforced each other until the line between historical crime and imperial nightmare grew difficult to separate. The Thuggee Brotherhood belongs to that second category. Associated in colonial-era accounts with organized bands of robbers and killers in India, often described as devotees of Kali, who murdered travelers through deception and strangulation, the Thuggee became one of the most infamous secret fraternities in the modern historical imagination. The very word thug would eventually enter English as a general term for violent criminality. That linguistic afterlife alone shows how powerfully the image took hold. That is what made the Thuggee so feared. This was not just violence out in the open, it was violence hidden inside ordinary social interaction. The nightmare was that a traveller could be speaking, eating, or moving in apparent companionship with men who had already marked him for death. Brotherhood, root knowledge, signal language, ritualized method, and patient deceit all combined to create a particularly intimate form of terror. People do not only fear killers, they fear killers who can pass as harmless until the exact moment of attack. Once that image lodges in the public mind, it becomes almost impossible to contain. What makes the Thuggee especially complicated, and therefore especially fitting for this list, is that colonial power amplified the story dramatically. British administrators and writers presented the Thuggee as a vast hidden menace requiring detection, mapping, interrogation, and suppression. Some level of organized criminal violence certainly existed, but the scale, coherence, and religious character of the Brotherhood were also shaped by colonial interpretation and the needs of empire. This is where fear becomes historically revealing. A secret violent network is frightening on its own. It becomes even more useful when a ruling power can turn it into proof that the land it governs was dark, irrational, and in need of control. The more frightening the Brotherhood appeared, the more righteous the suppression could sound. That does not make the fear unreal, it makes it layered. Travelers could genuinely fear deception, disappearance, and ritualized murder. Colonial authorities could genuinely pursue violent groups. But the Thuggee that survives in popular imagination is larger than any stable historical category. It is part criminal network, part religious nightmare, part Orientalist projection, and part imperial justification. That unstable mixture is exactly why it endured. Pure invention fades when exposed. Pure crime becomes police history. But a brotherhood wrapped in both real violence and exaggerated darkness becomes legend. And that is why the Thuggee Brotherhood takes the number 7 spot. It was feared too much because it seemed to embody one of the most primal social terrors of all. That the men walking beside you already belong to a hidden fraternity of death. Whether every detail of the classic narrative can be trusted is less important than what the narrative reveals. Secret brotherhoods become most frightening when they are imagined not merely as groups with hidden beliefs, but as systems that turn trust itself into the perfect place to hide a knife. Number 6. The Carbonari. Some secret brotherhoods are feared because they seem ancient and occult. Others are feared because they move through the political life of a nation so quietly that people begin to suspect hidden organization behind every visible upheaval. The Carbonari belong to that second category. Emerging most famously in Italy in the early 19th century, they became associated with clandestine political activism, revolutionary conspiracy, coded communication, and the kind of oath-bound brotherhood that thrives whenever official power becomes too rigid for open opposition. That alone made them dangerous in the eyes of rulers. But what made them deeply unsettling to wider society was the impression that they were everywhere and nowhere at once, an underground network linking men through secrecy, ritual, and shared political purpose. That is what gave the Carbonari such a powerful reputation. They were not merely a debating club of dissatisfied patriots. They used initiation, symbolic language, covert structure, and compartmentalized belonging, all the classic features that transform political dissent into something more mythic and threatening. Once a group operates in cells, speaks in signs, and binds loyalty through ritual, it stops looking like opinion and starts looking like hidden architecture. That change matters. Governments fear open criticism, but they fear invisible coordination even more. The Carbonari suggested that beneath the public surface of Italian life, there existed a second map, one drawn not by officials and princes, but by conspirators. What makes them especially fitting for this list is that they stood at the point where political idealism and fear of secret manipulation become almost impossible to separate. To sympathizers, the Carbonari could appear as patriots resisting oppressive structures and working toward national or constitutional transformation. To enemies, they looked like a disease in the body politic, a fraternity of oath-takers undermining order through shadows, plots, and seduction of the discontented. That split is precisely why secret political orders endure in dark historical memory. They can be seen as noble from within and corrosive from without, and each side uses the secrecy to magnify its own version of the truth. Their ritual culture deepened the unease further. A purely practical revolutionary network is dangerous in one way. A network with initiations, symbolic names, and quasi-mystical layers of belonging is dangerous in another. Ritual makes secrecy feel permanent. It suggests that the group is not only trying to achieve something, but to shape what its members are. This is one of the oldest reasons closed brotherhoods attract fear. They do not simply gather supporters. They appear to manufacture a parallel loyalty strong enough to compete with family, church, and state. In times of unrest, that kind of hidden allegiance becomes almost unbearable to established power. And that is why the Carbonari take the number 6 spot. They were feared too much, not because they were imaginary, but because they represented one of history's most unsettling possibilities. That political change might be incubating in rooms the state cannot see, among men who know one another by sign, oath, and purpose. The Carbonari remain haunting because they show how easily a secret brotherhood can become the dark mirror of a nation's open life, gathering under the surface until rulers begin to suspect that every disturbance may have been organized in advance. Number 5. The Cult of Mithras. Some secret orders are feared because they move through politics. Others are feared because they gather men into a closed sacred world whose center outsiders are never allowed to see. The Cult of Mithras belongs to that second category. One of the most enigmatic religious cults of the Roman world, Mithraism, flourished especially among soldiers and imperial networks, leaving behind underground temples, ritual imagery, and ranks of initiation, but almost no explanatory texts written for outsiders. That combination is exactly what makes it so unsettling in retrospect. It was present, visible enough to know it mattered, yet sealed where it counted. The cult appears before us as a series of clues arranged around a silence. That is what gave it such unusual power. Public Roman religion was largely legible. Sacrifices, festivals, priesthoods, and civic rituals could be seen and understood as part of collective life. Mithraism was different. It was initiatory, male-only in its main form, structured through grades, and centered in enclosed, sacred spaces that deliberately limited access. The more such a group grows while withholding its inner logic, the more it begins to trouble the imagination. People can tolerate strange beliefs more easily than hidden beliefs. A religion one can inspect becomes part of the social world. A religion whose inner acts are concealed begins to feel like a second world embedded inside the first. The imagery surrounding Mithras intensified that unease. The repeated icon of the god slaying the bull, the cave-like temple environment, the planetary or cosmic symbolism, and the progression through grades all suggested that initiation offered more than simple piety. It offered transformation. That is one of the oldest triggers of fear around secret brotherhoods. Once people suspect that a group does not merely teach but remakes those admitted into it, ordinary suspicion gives way to a darker kind. The initiate is no longer only a believer. He becomes a man who has seen something he cannot reveal and now belongs inwardly to another order. What makes the cult especially fitting for this list is the kind of men it attracted. Mithraism had strong associations with soldiers, officials, and the mobile machinery of empire. That matters because a secret religious brotherhood attached to ordinary marginal figures is one kind of concern. A secret brotherhood circulating among men who carry weapons, move through imperial systems, and sustain public order is another. Even if the cult was not politically conspiratorial in the modern sense, it could easily appear to outsiders as a hidden bond beneath visible hierarchy. Men serving Rome by day might be participating at night in rites the public could not witness or interpret. Few things generate more durable historical unease than that. And that is why the Cult of Mithras takes the number 5 spot. It was feared too much because it embodied the perfect form of respectable secrecy, structured, sacred, disciplined, and woven into the life of a great empire while refusing to explain itself openly. The cult remains haunting because its silence has never fully lifted. We know it mattered. We know men passed through its ranks. We know it shaped identity in ways initiation always does. But the inner experience remains partly hidden, and that hidden core is exactly where fear has always flourished most easily. Number 4. The Rosicrucians. Some secret brotherhoods were feared because they appeared to use violence. Others were feared because they seemed to hide something more destabilizing, a private map of knowledge, spiritual authority, and intellectual power that ordinary society could neither verify nor fully dismiss. The Rosicrucians belong to that second category. Emerging into European consciousness in the early 17th century through manifestos that described a mysterious brotherhood of enlightened men devoted to hidden wisdom, reform, and sacred knowledge, they became one of the most haunting examples of a society feared partly because no one could say with confidence whether it even existed in the way people imagined. That uncertainty was not a weakness, it was the source of the power. That is what made the Rosicrucians so unsettling. A visible order can be investigated, attacked, or regulated. A half-visible one spreads in a different way. The Rosicrucians entered history not as a simple institution with public membership rolls, but as an idea wrapped in secrecy, alchemical promise, Christian mysticism, coded reform, and the suggestion that hidden adepts might already be moving through Europe unseen. That changes the emotional atmosphere completely. People were no longer asking only what the Brotherhood believed. They were asking whether the most learned, spiritually advanced, or politically perceptive men of the age might already belong to an invisible inner circle. The manifestos themselves deepened that effect by offering exactly the kind of ambiguity that produces fear. They did not merely announce a club, they announced a tradition of concealed wisdom and selective revelation. They hinted at knowledge that might heal, transform, or reorient the world, but only under conditions not controlled by the public. That is one of the oldest patterns in the history of feared secret groups. Once a brotherhood appears to possess truths unavailable to ordinary institutions, whether churches, courts, universities, or rulers, it becomes difficult to tell whether it is visionary, fraudulent, or dangerously subversive. The less certain the answer, the faster rumor grows. What makes the Rosicrucians especially fitting for this list is that they were feared through both fascination and overreaction. Some treated them as a genuine hidden order of initiates. Others saw them as imposture, coded politics, or a sign that the age was slipping into spiritual and intellectual instability. Still others projected onto them almost every anxiety of the time. Religious upheaval, esoteric corruption, alchemical ambition, intellectual pride, and the suspicion that reform language was only a mask for deeper hidden power. This is exactly how fear enlarges a brotherhood beyond its stable historical outline. The group becomes a screen onto which an age projects its deepest unease about knowledge it cannot supervise. And that is why the Rosicrucians take the number 4 spot. They were feared too much because they embodied one of the most unnerving possibilities in European history, that the truly influential brotherhood might not announce itself through armies or assassinations, but through symbols, manuscripts, spiritual authority, and the whisper that the wisest men were already organized elsewhere. The Rosicrucians remain haunting because they turned secrecy into atmosphere. Even now, they feel less like a single society than like the idea of hidden knowledge learning how to walk through the world unnoticed. Number 3. The Bavarian Illuminati. Some secret societies are feared because they genuinely hid their structure. Others are feared because they became the modern template for hidden power itself. The Bavarian Illuminati belong to that second category. Founded in 1776 in Bavaria, the order was real, relatively short-lived as an organized institution, and committed in part to Enlightenment ideals, anti-clerical critique, and influence through secrecy. But what transformed it from one historical secret society into something far larger was the explosion of meaning attached to its name. The Illuminati stopped being just a group. It became the symbol people reached for whenever they needed to explain unseen coordination behind visible events. That is what gives the Bavarian Illuminati such enduring force. The order's actual historical life, structured membership, hidden correspondence, layered hierarchy, and covert ambitions to influence thought and institutions was already enough to make authorities uneasy. It was a closed network operating beneath official society and trying to shape minds from within. That alone fits the classical pattern of feared brotherhoods. But suppression did not end the fear. It amplified it. Once a secret order is banned, exposed, or driven underground, it becomes easier for the imagination to detach from the record. People stop asking what the group was and start asking what it may still be doing unseen. What makes the Illuminati especially powerful in historical memory is how perfectly it sits at the intersection of modern politics and conspiratorial psychology. Ancient cults could be feared as blasphemous. Medieval orders could be feared as heretical or treasonous. But the Illuminati appear in the age of revolutions, ideological upheaval, and collapsing trust in old authority. That means the Brotherhood could be made to explain almost anything, especially anything large, destabilizing, or difficult to understand. A revolution happens, moral order shifts, monarchy trembles, public life changes too quickly, and suddenly the hidden order feels like the most satisfying answer. Not because evidence always supports it, but because secrecy provides a shape strong enough to hold panic. The fear surrounding the Illuminati also reveals something deeper about modern society. Earlier ages feared secret rites or hidden doctrines. The modern age increasingly fears hidden systems, invisible coordination, elite manipulation, and the possibility that public events are merely surface effects. The Bavarian Illuminati became the ideal vessel for that fear. Its real existence gave just enough foundation, its secrecy gave just enough plausibility, and its collapse into legend gave infinite room for expansion. Once that happened, the order no longer needed actual continuity to remain terrifying. The name itself became a permanent engine of suspicion. And that is why the Bavarian Illuminati take the number 3 spot. They were feared too much, not simply because of what they did, but because they became the master symbol of what people dread secret societies might do. Few groups in history have generated such a long afterlife of amplified suspicion. The Illuminati remain haunting because they mark the point where the hidden brotherhood stops being one organization among many and becomes a universal explanation for power operating behind curtains. That transformation is far larger than the original order ever was, and that is exactly why the fear never died. Number 2. The Knights Templar. Some secret orders are feared because they whisper from the margins. Others are feared because they stood at the center of Christendom itself, wore the symbols of holiness openly, accumulated extraordinary wealth and influence, and then fell so dramatically that the collapse seemed to confirm every dark suspicion people already wanted to believe. The Knights Templar belong to that second category. Founded as a military order during the Crusades, they were not secret in the simple sense. Their existence was public, their religious identity was public, and their military role was public. But what happened inside the order, how its inner discipline worked, how its property was managed, how its vows and loyalties were enforced, and what exactly made it so powerful, all of that produced a deeper kind of unease. This was an order that looked holy, fought like professionals, and handled money on a scale unusual enough to make even kings nervous. That is what gave the Templars such enduring force in the historical imagination. They were warrior monks, a fusion already strange enough to unsettle ordinary categories. Monks were supposed to pray, knights were supposed to fight. The Templars did both under vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience while controlling property, castles, networks of command, and systems of transfer that made them look to outsiders almost like an independent structure moving beneath ordinary feudal life. Once a brotherhood begins to resemble a state inside states, fear grows quickly. People do not just wonder what the group believes. They wonder whether the group can no longer be safely contained by the world around it. What makes the Templars especially fitting for this list is the violence of the accusations made against them. Heresy, blasphemy, secret rites, spitting on the cross, obscenities in initiation, forbidden kisses, hidden idols, all the classic charges that appear when authorities want to turn a closed order into something morally intolerable. Whether those accusations were fabricated, coerced, exaggerated, or mixed with fragments of misunderstood ritual is part of the historical debate. But that debate itself reveals the real point. Once a powerful order becomes vulnerable, secrecy works against it as much as for it. The less outsiders know for certain, the easier it becomes to imagine the worst. The Templars were feared not only because they were strong, but because they were structured enough to appear capable of hiding anything. The political dimension makes the fear even darker. The Order's suppression was not simply a moral drama. It unfolded within a world of royal debt, papal pressure, institutional jealousy, and the intolerable fact that the Templars had become too rich, too armed, too transnational, and too self-contained for some rulers to feel comfortable with. That matters because the most feared brotherhoods are often the ones that trigger both paranoia and appetite at once. People do not merely hate them, they want what the Order has, and destruction becomes easier once fear has done the preparatory work. In that sense, the Templars became victims of one of history's most reliable patterns. A secretive and powerful order is first admired, then envied, then morally darkened until suppression begins to look like cleansing, and that is why the Knights Templar take the number 2 spot. They were feared too much because they embodied the most explosive combination a secretive brotherhood can achieve: sacred legitimacy, military strength, financial sophistication, and a hidden inner life outsiders could never fully inspect. The Templars remain haunting because their fall left behind one of history's most perfect shadows, the image of a holy order so powerful that once it was attacked, people could believe almost anything about what had been happening inside its walls. Whether martyrs, manipulators, or simply a brotherhood destroyed by politics, they became larger than themselves the moment fear closed over their name. Number 1. The Assassins. Some secret brotherhoods are feared because they hide knowledge. Others are feared because they hide the willingness to kill with patience, precision, and ideological certainty. The Assassins belong to that highest category, associated most famously with the Nizari Ismailis and the fortified world of Alamut. They entered medieval memory as the order that made rulers, generals, and powerful men feel vulnerable even in protected spaces. That alone would have been enough to secure notoriety. But what transformed them into the most feared brotherhood on this list was the way secrecy, discipline, selective violence, and outsider imagination fused together until the order seemed less like a community and more like a machine designed to make power itself afraid. That is what gave the Assassins such extraordinary force. They were not imagined as a mob or a battlefield army. They were imagined as a hidden network able to wait, infiltrate, disguise, and strike at exactly the right moment. This is one of the most terrifying forms secret power can take. Open enemies can be confronted. Hidden enemies turn every wall, servant, messenger, and pilgrim into a possible breach. Once a group gains the reputation of being able to kill with calm deliberation at close range, it no longer needs vast numbers to produce outsized fear. The imagination multiplies its reach automatically. A ruler begins guarding not only against armies, but against presence itself. What makes the Assassins especially powerful in history is the way fact and myth enlarged each other. The Nizari order was real. Its political religious world was real. Its use of targeted killing as a form of strategic pressure was real enough to terrify opponents. But around that reality grew layers of legend, stories of absolute obedience, drugged initiates, paradise gardens, and followers so devoted they could be directed toward death without hesitation. Whether particular tales were slander, misunderstanding, literary embellishment, or enemy fantasy, they succeeded because they matched the emotional profile of the group too well. People already feared a disciplined hidden order. They were ready to believe it possessed methods as extreme as its reputation required. The Assassins also reveal something fundamental about why secret brotherhoods inspire disproportionate terror. They do not merely operate outside ordinary life. They appear to recruit the most intimate human powers, loyalty, identity, sacrifice, and death, into a closed chain of command. Once outsiders suspect that an inner circle can produce men more loyal to the order than to family, ruler, or survival itself, fear rises beyond ordinary politics. The group starts to feel like a second sovereignty. This is exactly what made the Assassins such a durable nightmare in medieval and later imagination. They suggested that conviction hidden inside secrecy could outmatch brute force. And that is why the Assassins take the number 1 spot. They were feared too much, not because they were fictional, but because the real strategic terror they produced was amplified by legends perfectly suited to an age already anxious about hidden enemies and fanatical devotion. No other brotherhood on this list so completely turned secrecy into weaponized psychological force. The Assassins remain the ultimate feared order because they made one chilling promise feel plausible to everyone around them. That no matter how powerful you were, someone patient and unseen might already be close enough to reach you.